Hey everyone, Michelle Seidling here with another episode of Food Experience Unplugged. Today we're looking at the unique health goals of those in the nonprofit sector and how you can balance your health among your nonprofit responsibilities. Here to help us do that is Liza Baker, a health coach and nonprofit consultant at Simply Health Coaching. This podcast is available on multiple platforms, including YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and others, as well as our website at foodexperienceunplugged.com. Please be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform for new content as it becomes available. Please also check out our website at foodexperienceunplugged.com for some free resources as you begin your health journey. Okay. Liza Baker, welcome to Food Experience Unplugged.
Thank you, Michelle. Excited to be here.
Oh, we're excited to have you to talk about the nonprofit sector and what unique health requirements and health challenges there are in that sector. So important on many different fronts for all the good that nonprofit sectors do. To start out with, could you introduce yourself and tell us, what brought you to this point in your career, in your life?
Ah, that's a funny question because I have one of those resumes where you read it and you think, wow, this woman could do anything, or wow, this woman is completely unemployable. Like, what was she doing teaching Chinese for 5 years? And now she's in food? What? So yeah, my deep dark past is that I was a foreign language teacher and I taught Chinese. And after that, I went back into food in the service, like food and beverage industry, and realized that I didn't want to be serving food. I wanted to be making food, and I definitely did not want to be doing it in a restaurant kitchen. So I became a caterer and a private chef. Went to culinary school, did that whole route, and then had kids, which does not mix with catering. So I stepped away from that and did a lot of administrative work, most of it in the nonprofit sector. And during our most recent move to Michigan, about 11 years ago, I landed in a food systems nonprofit. So they work at the intersection of food systems, healthy food access, sustainable agriculture, and social justice. And got back into food in a big way, and then started thinking about all the other things that nourish us or don't, and ended up getting certified as a health coach. And so now I'm a full-time health coach with a focus on women who work in the nonprofit sector, or as I like to say, mission-driven work, and putting all my skills to use, both in sort of neurolinguistic mindset programming way back to teaching languages, and of course, as an entrepreneur, using all those administrative skills. And yeah, so it all comes together in a really weird way.
In a wonderful way.
Yes. Yep.
That's fantastic that you have such a diversity of skills,
Oh, yes.
and maybe you have opportunities sometimes to use Chinese in your
Yeah, not
work.
very
I don't
often. My
know.
husband is from China, though, so people come to us and say, "Oh, you must know where the best Chinese food is in town." It's like, yeah, that would be my house. Not helpful.
Absolutely. And wow, and to get into mission driven work. Now you're by mission driven work, you mean the nonprofit, or is there a
I
distinction between
do,
the
but
two?
I like to be a little vague. I'm intentionally using the expression mission driven work because it covers things like B corporations that are not all about the profit. It covers fields like nursing, education, hospice care, certain kinds of health care. And I'm specifically vague because I really want people in those industries that profit is not necessarily the motive there. It really is about caring for other people and caring for our communities and caring for our environment. And I think those people are a very special breed. So I say, nurses, hospice caregivers, healthcare workers, educators, non-profiteers. Those are my people.
Okay, wow, that's quite a good array of things.
Yes,
So
and now especially we're talking still during the pandemic. I think a lot of those people are really on the front lines, particularly nonprofits who serve underserved populations, because those populations are getting hit particularly hard. So those people are getting particularly burned out.
sure, absolutely. So now tell us a little bit about, now you focus on generally women in the
Yeah.
in mission-driven work.
Yeah.
Now now tell us a little bit about the presence of women in mission-driven work. Why is that
Yeah,
important to you?
women still dominate the mission-driven world at certain levels. We are 77% of public school teachers. We are 91 to 92% of nurses still, and 75% of the nonprofit sector are women. And we can get into a conversation another day about how many of those women are in leadership positions. But yeah, so the populations in mission-driven work tend to be heavily female or female identified, and I think that's really important because a lot of these women are what I call chronic caregivers. We go into this work because we care for other people and we want to nurture other people. And as a result, we usually don't nurture ourselves. Our own health is so often on the back burner that we don't even think about it. And there's this idea of mental load where 75% of the mental load of running a household usually falls on the woman. And mental load means things like, what are the kids' teachers' names? What are their friends' names? What do their friends' parents do? Where does this child need to be and at what time? Whose birthday party are we going to? Who's going to buy the present? Where does the invitation need to go? All these things add up to what's called mental load. And that's not to say that men don't take part in household chores, driving carpools, things like that, but most of the time there's a woman behind him saying, oh, you need to drive from school to gymnastics at this time and don't forget to pick up so and so. So that mental load is already a thing for us, and it turns out that the more full-time we work, the heavier that load becomes. You would think it would be the opposite, like, oh, I work full-time so we divvy it up. I work full time, therefore I know even more about that than my spouse. So that's a huge issue in for women in general, but I think particularly for these women who are chronic caregivers. We really aren't able
Absolutely.
to step away and say, "Oh, if I don't do it, somebody else will do it." So in the nonprofit world, there is a large population that is women over 40. And women over 40, whether they know it or not, most of us are already headed towards menopause, and that brings with it a whole new range of issues.
Absolutely. So specifically with the mission driven work, are you seeing basically and just an additional burden or additional challenges that may
Yeah,
not be present in other sectors?
yeah, I think the rates of burnout tend to be much higher in those sectors, and like I said, especially right now where, nurses are on the front lines and many of them are actually working more than they were before, and burnout is just an epidemic in a lot of those sectors.
Interesting. Is it any in particular, or would you say, medical, education, others, are they all about the same?
Yeah, I would say medical and education, and also just to pull back from the mission driven sector a little bit, thinking about the fact that so many of us are now working at home, and we're not just working full time at home. We are now, in part, the teacher, the lunch lady, the phys ed instructor, the driver, it's crazy how many tasks that we sort of have taken for granted that other people are going to do for our children have now landed back on us. And so there was an article recently talking about how that mental load again shifted mostly to the women. So when it's a man and a woman couple at home with children, the men have been working from home and not picking up much of the rest of the work.
Interesting. So basically, when it comes to their health, you mentioned they're putting it on the back burner. So what are their unique, specific challenges that they're facing other than with that mental load? What do we mean by the mental load, and how you alluded to it a little bit, but how does that translate into health challenges?
Yeah, I think the way that translates is that we very often look at self-care, and I don't particularly like that word because really what that says to me, self-care to me is sort of what Cosmo is telling you to do, and I prefer to say soul care. That's kind of like what the universe is asking you to do for yourself. And we tend to go down these rabbit holes of should, and that word is incredibly triggering to me because when we say I should be doing something, it very often feels like one more thing. Oh, I should be doing yoga. I should be meditating. I should be journaling. I should have a gratitude practice. I should be eating right. I should be exercising. And it just becomes another list of things that we're supposed to do.
Mm,
So I think really what I've been working on a lot with women is, and I heard I forget, is it David Shar, was that his name? He was
mm,
talking about the oxygen mask metaphor.
mhm,
It's overused, but it's so appropriate. You cannot pour from an empty cup. If you are taking care of people all day long and not filling your own cup, there is not going to be anything there for you to give really soon. So especially in this time, it feels like there is much more going out than coming in terms of nourishing ourselves. So it's exacerbating the problem.
mm. Interesting. Now, what should those in
Don't
mission-driven
say that word.
work
Just kidding. Should again.
Okay. Oh, I
It's
said
hard to get
should.
around it. Yeah, it's hard to get
Okay.
around it. What can? What can?
What what is a good idea for those in mission-driven work to focus on when it comes to their health? Mhm,
Yeah, I think a major thing is to remember that we're all unicorns. Every one of us is completely different from everybody else in the world, and we tend to look outside ourselves for these ideas of what we should be doing. So, for example, we might read a book by the latest diet book, or we might follow somebody who's an exercise guru online, or our best friend tried this diet, and we tend to take that as gospel and think, okay, gonna do this. I'm gonna become vegan. I'm gonna do this hit workout. I'm gonna this. And then when it doesn't work for us, we don't blame them. We blame ourselves.
mm,
So I think one really important thing is to recognize that you are completely unique. And you may want to start with that idea, but then pick and choose what works from it. And don't beat yourself up about it if it doesn't work for you. We tend to look outside and want these like sparkly band-aids and silver bullets that will fix us. And I think one major shift is to stop thinking of yourself as broken and recognizing that, oh, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be given my heredity, my nourishment growing up, nature, nurture, all of that, and the choices that I've made. Because when you look at it that way, then you recognize, oh, if I've made choices that aren't good for me, I can start making choices that are better for me. And then gradually over time, I'm going to get healthier. And
mm,
so there is no silver bullet, no one time here, do this detox and your life will be different forever. It
mhm,
really is. It's a lifestyle change. It's a way of looking at food choices, lifestyle choices as these little tiny micro habits that you can start stacking on top of each other. So maybe you start with like, oh, I don't drink enough water. I haven't listened to it, but I saw you had a whole episode on hydration.
mhm,
And great. If you're not drinking enough water, add a glass of water before every meal. Like it's that simple because we get this idea that self-care is one more list of things that you need to do and it's going to take you hours. No, it can be tiny, tiny steps that you stack up on top of each other over time.
Interesting. So it's
And usually
more
starting with food, a lot of people, think about diet immediately, like, oh, the food choices I'm going to make. Yes, that's a great place to start. And it's not necessarily everybody's place to start. It's really, it depends on what I call it your gateway is. For some people, it might be exercise. For some people, it might be getting enough sleep. For some people, it might be food. But, start somewhere. Don't try to take everything on at once.
absolutely. So basically for those you work with, you kind of transition them into different, whatever their goals happen to be.
Yeah, usually we start out by taking a look at, what they've been doing so far and how that's been working for them and where can we make some really small changes because I very often have clients who say, "Oh, I want to get in shape." And at the end of the conversation, I'm like, "Okay, do you think you can take a 10-minute walk every day?" And they're like, "Oh, I thought I was going to have to go to the gym for hours every day." It's like, "No, because if you're not doing that now, what makes you think you're going to do that tomorrow?" So yeah, really just tiny steps. Like, where do you want to go? And then let's break it down. Because if you say, I want to lose 50 pounds, that sounds insanely difficult. But if you say, oh, if I want to lose 50 pounds, I need to start by losing 1 pound. Let's
Mhm,
start with one and then let's talk about five and then let's get to 10. And here are the things that you could consider doing to get there. And they're all teeny tiny, like drink water, eat more dark leafy greens, move your body. Really simple, simple things.
mm. Yes. Now, how you mentioned, a lot of times people consider the self-care, the eating healthy, the exercise is just kind of one more thing on their list to do among their other mission-driven work. Now, how do they typically what are some tips, where they can kinda, I guess, reshuffle the deck on their priorities or their to-dos and have that be more of a prominent role and
Hmm.
help them to do the mission-driven work?
Yeah, I think the first thing is really making that mindset shift that I have got to make time for myself. And sadly, I think a lot of us start recognizing that only after we've hit rock bottom. It's very common for somebody at rock bottom to say, "Oh my gosh, help!" It's not so common for somebody who's like, I could be feeling a little bit better to be really super committed to doing something like that. So sadly, most people hit rock bottom. But I think the way to really prioritize that is first of all that mindset shift that it doesn't have to be hours and hours. Let's make it super simple, tiny steps. And I really like to encourage people to do what I call create a container. So all of us know what we should be doing to be healthy. We know how to eat and the fact that we should move our bodies and get enough sleep and drink enough water. We know this, we're just not doing it. So, what I encourage people to do is to create what I call a container. And for me, this is going to sound nuts, but my container from the time I had little kids was I get up at 4 in the morning and I know that I have 2 hours where I can do whatever I want. And of course, part of that is always physical therapy exercises and maybe some yoga, maybe some meditation. But for other people, it could be journaling or it could be reading, it could be making themselves a good breakfast. Whatever it is, make those containers of time and make those containers non negotiable. What you do inside that container is up to you. And hopefully, you're going to make some choices that are the better choices. But when you have that container set aside, it's much easier to not feel like I have to do 10 minutes of yoga and 10 minutes of stretching. A lot of us are really rebellious. And when we're told that we have to do it, we're like, not going to do it. But if you just create that container, it's kind of like, here's my toolbox. And inside that toolbox, I have all these things that I could do. And it might look different day to day, but every day I'm going to do something for myself. And it can be as little as 10 or 15 minutes.
Hmm. Interesting. So the container is not necessarily everything you have to do in the entire day.
No, not at all. The container is just like you are setting aside 15 minutes, half an hour, even an hour if you have that. Not a lot of us can get up really early, but maybe your time is after the kids go to bed and you have half an hour. Maybe you have 15 minutes. So that's the part that's non-negotiable. And I really ask people to put that on your calendar, set a reminder on your phone, and don't cancel that. Don't cancel on yourself because usually that's what gets canceled. If we have a meeting with our boss, we're not likely to cancel just because. But if we have an appointment with ourselves and something else comes up, that something else very often cancels out what we were going to do for ourselves. So the first step is really trying to make that a set in stone appointment with yourself. And especially for women who are in leadership positions, may have an assistant, something like that, that tells your assistant, like, no, you can't schedule over that time. That is my time. And it's not negotiable. So that's my biggest recommendation is really to create some time. And then what tools go in that toolbox. And then if you don't like, for some it's monotony, for me it's routine. If you don't like routine, then you have choices within that time.
Mm. So do people typically or not so typically have several little containers throughout the day?
Oh, we start with one. If we can just do one, I'm really happy. But yes, a lot of people start with one and then maybe add another one. So maybe first thing in the morning and maybe one more later in the afternoon or in the evening. And just whenever you can sneak it in. And then it kind of becomes a habit. And even when you don't have a container blocked off, if you have 15 minutes between meetings, you might say, "Ooh, I could go for a walk. Oh, I could, make myself a cup of tea." Anything that when you get in the habit of like, I could do something to take care of myself in these few minutes that I do have.
Okay, so it's not necessarily doing a specific thing, it's just basically dedicating that time to yourself no matter what it is, whether it's
Yeah,
yoga or walking
right.
or anything else.
Yeah, and really finding what works for you. Like we think, oh, I want to meditate, and this is what meditation looks like because this is everything I've read about it. No, I have a client who discovered recently that she does meditate. She happens to do it while she's knitting, because that idea that she cannot watch TV and focus on the pattern. She does these beautiful patterned things, and she cannot do something else while she's doing it. So it's that single point of focus, and really not able to think about other stuff, much less watch or listen to other things. That's really what meditation is. It's just that ability to focus down and stop all the thoughts from taking over. And so for
Mm.
her, it happens to be knitting.
Mm. Yes, I love that. I love how they're making it unique to them. They're making their
Yeah.
routine unique.
Yeah, so that's an example of meditation. And for me personally, spiritual practice, I was never really able to think about church as my spiritual practice. Now, for some people, that works. For me, oddly enough, cooking is a spiritual practice, because I think about, when I go into that kitchen, I am going deep inside myself and I am creating something that's then going to nourish other people. And it's like, that's what a spiritual practice is. Like, you go inside yourself, you find some things out and you bring it out, and then you share it with the world. So maybe it's cooking, maybe it's a walk in nature, anything that gets you back in touch with whatever you consider divine.
Mm. Interesting. I love that. How just you're just getting in touch with whatever aspect of health
Yeah, and
is the focus.
yeah, and ironically, if you look at most communities of faith who now have, most of them have a vision and a mission statement. I would say probably 85-90% of those mission statements goes like this: come on in, learn with us, and then go out and share it with the world. So in some
Mhm.
ways, that's, to me, the essence of a spiritual practice. So go inside yourself, find something in there that's important to you, and then share it,
Mhm.
because it could
Absolutely.
help somebody else. Yeah.
Yes. Now, you mentioned that, a lot of people are kind of get to rock bottom before they start their way back. Do you have any examples of those who maybe have come to you at rock bottom, and the
Yeah.
kind of the transition that they've made?
Yeah, I have one client in particular who always pops into my mind, she's an executive director of a nonprofit, local nonprofit, and, just got really unhealthy, started having all this joint pain, gained a lot of weight, was over 300 pounds, and was still just like, I don't have time. I don't have time. And the very first time we talked, where we were just trying to figure out, were we a good fit? She said, okay, here's the deal. I get breakfast at McDonald's, and that is not going to change. And don't even talk to me about going to the gym, because that is not going to change. And I said, okay, well, we'll work around that. We'll figure something out. And she's like, really? I said, sure. So, I worked with her for 6 months, and did she lose 200 and some pounds? No. However, she got to the point where she would go and buy her breakfast at McDonald's. And then in her office, she had a bag of spinach. And so she would buy like an egg McMuffin, and she would add a bunch of spinach to it. Like, great, you made it healthier. And then she said, okay, well, one day I get it with bacon, one day I get it with cheese, but I don't get both, you know? And then in terms of the gym, it's like, she started taking a few walks around the block, and then she signed up for a course at the gym. And now she's just like, oh, I miss my workout. I miss it. So it's just really a mindset shift that, oh, within my limitations of time and resources and opportunities, there's always a choice. There's always a better choice. And if you can make it 50% of the time, great. Let's start with 50% of the time. And then you move it up to 75% of the time. And then maybe 80%, 90% of the time. Because if you're making the better choice, you know, 8 or 9 out of 10 times, those 1 or 2 times are not going to kill you.
That's true. Very
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. We always think we have very all or nothing thinking, like, oh, I have to give up ice cream completely. Well, maybe you do, and maybe you can have a scoop of ice cream once in a while, just not 3 scoops every night.
Absolutely. So yes, I love how that transition, like that particular example, of how she just kind of you met her where she
Yeah.
was at the time and just kind of phased in what she wanted to accomplish.
Yeah, and it really has to be their decision, because, I might say, well, how about going to the gym 3 times this week? If that feels impossible, they still feel like they need to say yes. Okay, I'll do that. And then you come back 2 weeks later for the next session, and they're like, oh, I didn't go 3 times. And it's sort of this cycle of beating ourselves up about it. And I think that's another really important point, is that we set ourselves up to fail by thinking, oh, I don't work out at all. I can go to the gym 3 times a week. And then when we don't do it, we beat ourselves up. And
Mm.
what's that all about? Just go once. If you can make it once, great. Anything else is gravy. Everything else is extra credit. And that's something that I really encourage clients to do. I have another client who was really, she came to me and it was sort of this idea that, oh, I'm going to have a new kind of diet and I'm going to lose 10 to 20 pounds. And it's really about like the externals. And after we worked together, she said, it's really not about what other people think of me. It's more about how I want to show up in the world. And it really is that idea that we need to start getting curious about ourselves rather than just taking the world's opinion of us for granted.
Mm. Absolutely, especially with mission driven work because we're giving so much
Yeah.
and that it's time. Is there, do you think there's more of a tendency with mission driven work to kind of more attention to, what others are thinking about us rather than what we're thinking about us?
Not necessarily. I think there is definitely a tendency to give more than we ask for. In the nonprofit sector, in particular, there are a lot of problems with funding programs because funders love to fund program. They don't want to fund the people who are doing the program. So when you talk to nonprofit consultants who work in capacity building, very often it's leadership development, professional development, communications, things like that. But very few of those people are actually building the capacity of the individual to do their work because they're healthy. So if you think about, a personal health program will actually have very far-reaching consequences in organizational sustainability. Because if I can make a woman's personal health sustainable, like she can make changes and keep making them into the future that are going to make her healthy, whether I'm working with her or not, she's going to show up more energetic, more engaged, more able to focus. She's going to do better at work, and then that work is going to make the world better, and the organization will be more fundable because they're doing better programs, they're getting better results, and the funders will look at them and say, oh yeah, okay, this organization is worth funding, and it's because the people doing the work actually aren't turning over every few months.
Interesting. Yes, and because they're paying attention to their health, they can have that capacity to pay attention to whatever their work happens to
Yeah,
be.
they're just able to function better at work, and it's not driving themselves to the point of exhaustion to do the work. It's like they're healthy, so they show up happy. They love their work for the most part. That's not a lot of people go into nonprofit work because they hate the work. Not a lot of people go into it because of the money, because the money's not there. Yeah, and it's an interesting market because the women in nonprofits are very often, first of all, older women who are coming back to work after raising children. Very often they are women who have a partner or spouse who is making good money. They have benefits, so they don't need the benefits because there again, the nonprofit sector is hard pressed to provide benefits for a lot of workers. So they really are this group of people who will put in insane hours because they love the work, not because they're going to get paid for overtime.
Absolutely. So now, do you find that there are more unique health challenges being in that type of situation rather than others who may be part of mission driven work or other
No, I think
sectors?
it's mostly the burnout. Burnout is a huge factor in nonprofit work, and the turnover is crazy. And it costs organizations a lot of money to replace people when they leave, especially at the executive level, but also at the program level. So if you have a program manager who burns out and just can't do her work anymore, when you bring somebody new in, you have to not only train them in what the work is, but you have to, make sure that they make all the same relationships. And how do we connect these program people with funders and with the people they serve and all the other stakeholders? It's a
Mm,
lot of work and it takes a lot of money. So really, it's worth investing in these people so that they don't leave.
sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So my
And
mission really is to get nonprofit organizations to start funding this kind of health coaching and wellness work as an employee benefit, because I think there's a lot of evidence that employee wellness programs are failing. Like there's really no evidence that all of these on-site gyms and on-site clinics and things like that are helping because they're too focused on physical well-being, and there needs to
mm,
be a much more holistic it's about well-being rather than health.
Mm. Okay. So they're focused on more of the health aspect or the
Yeah,
okay.
a lot of employee wellness programs really are more about diet and exercise, and that's great. There's no
Mhm.
problem with that because very often that can be someone's, like I said, that can be someone's gateway into other stuff. But the programs that are proving to be more effective are the ones that are looking at things like mental health, emotional resiliency, financial health. So really looking at more than just what's going in your mouth and how are you moving your body.
Sure,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and it needs to be the reason that I really promote health coaching for something like this is that it needs to be geared more to the individual, and it's very hard to do that if you're going to offer, physical movement classes. We're going to offer yoga, we're going to offer aerobics. Well, not everybody wants to do yoga or aerobics. Not everybody's body is made to do that. And if you can come up with a way to say, okay, let's talk about what kind of physical activity people want or need, and let's start addressing that, whether it's, oh, maybe we give them a certain amount of money towards a gym membership. Then
Mhm.
you don't have to provide those classes, and yet there's an incentive for people to move their bodies in the
Mhm.
way that works for them.
Yes, and
And
you
that's not going to come to light unless you actually talk to individuals rather than just saying, okay, you will all do aerobics.
Yes, and that way they have the flexibility of, go no matter what type of gym, no matter what type of routine, they'll
Right.
have that. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. So now there are, you mentioned, people, who start at rock bottom, but there are likely others within the spectrum of those who come to see you. Or
Mhm.
are there other examples? What are some other examples of of success stories where they've really transitioned and made their health part of their routine?
Yeah, and that's an interesting question because I think what really happens is that these people start getting healthy and therefore they're making better choices for their families as well. So one person I think of in particular came to me because she was one of these women who has children, and the first thing the kids ask when they get in the car after school is, "Hey, what's for dinner?" And all you want to do is like, "Whatever you make, I don't care." But her goal was really to transform that whole interaction. Oh, and I loved your episode with, I'm going to forget her, Jerica Burge, I think, about family meals, because that is a huge part of my work too. Is like getting people back into the kitchen, cooking from scratch, and sitting down to eat a family meal. Like, this is what this client was working on, and it was great because we really tend to treat cooking as a chore now. And I don't expect my clients to treat it like a spiritual practice like I do, but it would also help if they had the resources not to feel like, oh, God, I have to do this every single night or else I'm going to get them takeout and, fast food and stuff like that. But really the idea that there's a way to simplify that whole meal planning and cooking process. And because I came from the culinary world, that's been something that I've been doing a lot of teaching around, which is not just cooking from scratch, but also meal planning and how to make it so that you don't every night have to look at a recipe and then think, oh, but I don't have this. I can't go do this unless I go to the grocery store. And so figuring out a way to cook from scratch every night. And it can be done because my husband and I did it for years while our kids were growing up. Um, just this idea that you don't have to start cooking from scratch every single night. My favorite example is, let's say you're, an omnivore and you're making a roast chicken and broccoli and rice for dinner. Great. Why not make two chickens? Because then later in the week, you can cut them up and use them for tacos or whatever you want to use it for. It doesn't take more than 5 minutes to put an extra chicken in the oven, and the oven's standing empty anyway, right? Chicken doesn't take up that much room. So if you can just make double the chicken, you have something later in the week that you can cut up and use for chicken salad or nachos or tacos or whatever. If you make extra rice, you can make it into hot cereal in the morning. You can make it into a casserole. If you make extra broccoli, you can have, broccoli soup later in the week, or you can put broccoli in a pasta salad. So you're not starting all of that one night and then the next night cooking more broccoli because you decided to make pasta with broccoli. Like, that broccoli could have been done the night before. So this woman in particular was all about learning how to meal plan, and have to say she did a great job.
That's fantastic. I love that, how she just kind of realized the flexibility that she had with
Yeah.
mealtime.
Yeah, and really my whole mantra that she really started using herself is like, Always, always, always cook for more than one meal. And that doesn't mean make this huge pot of chili that you're going to eat for a week. Because guess what? You're not going to. You're going to eat it one night. The next night, you're going to be like, ugh, leftovers. And the third night, I'm like, oh, throw it out. But, it can look like that if you cook extra and then freeze it for some other day. Great. But it can look really different in terms of really small things that you can do. So you can make an extra batch of rice, make an extra chicken, always thinking like, if I made extra of this, what can I do later in the week? Rather than here are the 7 recipes I'm going to use, and every one of them has different ingredients, and every one of them I have to go to the store and get. So really, my expression for it is flip your kitchen. That's actually the name of the cookbook too, is just look at your pantry and figure out what you can do with it rather than looking at a recipe and going to the grocery store.
Okay. It's because you're using what you've got, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And really cutting down on how much food we waste too, because that's a huge issue in this country, especially.
Sure, absolutely. Now, are there any particular resources that are helpful for those in the non or in mission driven work to utilize as they're focusing more on their health?
I think it really comes down to a couple very simple steps. Number one, that mindset shift that you're not broken. It's going to be okay. And you can use any resources you want as long as you remember that not there's no one answer for everybody. So, you might love a particular way of eating. Great. Your husband may not thrive on that. So it's also a situation where you have to learn how to cook so that you're not cooking 3 different meals. It's so often that we have these what they call now mixed diet families. Where suddenly the teenager's like, well, I'm vegan, so I'm not eating anything you're making. That those resources are really, I think you have to look at the resource and figure out what works for you rather than buying into something wholesale and then really beating yourself up because it didn't work out. So any sort of resource you turn to is fine as long as you do the research behind it. A lot of those resources out there right now are, this evidence-based is a big word right now, but I think there's a lot of suspect science out there, and I think we tend to buy into it because we're looking outside ourselves for those resources. And that's probably another way to look at it, which is you have all the resources you need inside yourself. You need to let them out. You need to figure out, like, what is my body telling me it wants rather than what does Dr. So-and-so say my body should be wanting? Like, do I really feel like this is the best way for me to work out? Do I really believe that this is the best diet for me? And just constantly questioning that and recognizing that it's going to change over time is also super important, because very often we think, oh, I became vegan and it's the best thing I have ever done. And then 10 years later, all of a sudden you're having health issues and like, well, I've always been vegan. It's what works for me. Well, maybe you should experiment with that a little bit. Or, you're doing really high intensity workouts. If your hip is hurting, maybe you should think about whether that workout is what you should be doing right now. So just constantly going back deep inside yourself and looking for the answers rather than looking outside yourself for the answers. So I know that doesn't answer your question about resources, but I think we are our own best resource. We need to get back in touch with that intuition, because when you go really deep inside yourself, you probably know that something's not working for you. And it just seems like so much work to change it.
Yes, but I love it actually does answer the question because you've got, a whole host of things. People are looking up different diets or different exercise equipment or something like that. But at the same time, having that flexibility over time that just because I bought a treadmill 10 years ago doesn't mean I have to keep using it for the next 50 years or
Yeah. Yeah. And that idea about intuition, because I have a lot of clients tell me, oh no, I'm so not intuitive. It's like, I bet you are. And here's my test. It's 90 some degrees and really humid out in Michigan today. And if I said to you, hey, Michelle, I'm going to give you hot soup for lunch, what's your reaction? Do you go, oh yeah? Or do you go, oh no? Just that swaying towards something or the backing away from it, that's your intuition. And we don't tune into that very often. It's kind of like if you're one of those, my kids call them the mom who lives at school, the one who is involved in every committee and volunteers for everything. God bless them. I'm not complaining about them. But if you are one of those women and somebody comes to you and says, oh, I really need you to serve on the prom committee, same thing. Do you go, oh yeah, I'd love to? Or do you think, oh, I cannot add one more thing? So then the answer to that question is, is it a full body yes, or is it a like, oh, hell no? And
Mhm.
when did we stop listening to that?
Mm.
I mean, obviously, there are some times where you have to say, if your boss tells you you need to do something, you probably need to do it.
Mhm.
However, if you're having that full body no, I can't, then maybe you need to have a discussion about it. Maybe it's like, I would love to do this for you, and I am stretched so thin right now, I'm not sure I would do a good job. There
Mm.
are ways to look at that yes or no and think about, oof, if the answer is no, how can I phrase it so that it's not, oh, hell no.
Now,
But really
why
getting into that.
Sure, absolutely. Now, you mentioned we don't always listen to that, to our feelings like that. Why do you think that's the case?
That's such a great question. I think very often it's easier to think that somebody else has the answer. I think
Mm,
it basically comes right down to that. Like, well, they're the expert. Mm, the only expert on you is you. And we are not used to thinking that way at all. And uh, once in a while, that sort of rebellion is a good thing.
absolutely. I love that you are the expert to
Yeah,
yourself. That's
you are
so,
the
so
expert
important.
on you. Nobody else can tell you how you're feeling about something.
Yes, that is, oh, I love that. Excellent point. So, so Lisa, how can people get in contact with you if they want to know
Well,
more?
the easiest way to get in touch with me is my website. That is Lisa Central. Everything is there. And my website is simplyhealthcoaching.com. And you can find links to some of my free content is on there. Right now, I'm offering a lot of free virtual workshops. And I do 3 workshops over the course of 3 months, and they cycle. So if you miss it 1 month, you can catch it the next month. So there are 3 workshops in a row. And then they'll change in the fall. I'll be doing a different series, and all my podcast is there, my blog is there, and also how to work with me is there. Come on in. I love my virtual communities. There are lots of ways to get in touch, and the best way to do that is on my website, simplyhealthcoaching.com/community, and there are links to all kinds of stuff there.
Okay, excellent. Well, we will include all of that in the show notes. And Lisa, it's been such a pleasure. I
It's
love, how
great.
you take a deep dive into mission-driven work and really focus on helping people to balance their health with their work responsibilities.
Yeah, yeah, it's super important in that industry. And especially right now, when you think about those teachers who, every day they see our kids more than we do during the work
Mhm.
week, right? I mean, they see our kids more than we do during the work week. And now they've been asked to put everything online. Not a strong suit for a lot of those people who are used to doing hands-on work. So they're doing double time. When, we think we're doing double time, so are these teachers, and the nurses are working extra time, and all those women in nonprofits, God bless them, making the world a better place. Don't forget to take care of yourself while you're doing it.
Absolutely. So, Lisa, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being part of our episode today.
Thank you, Michelle. It's been great.